My name's Tom Alsop, and in this introduction to tennis, we're going to start off by talking about ball control because who can control the tennis ball best is going to be the most successful. In order to control the tennis ball, we have to understand spins. Obviously, the ball is round, it's going to want to rotate, and we have to understand how the racket is connected with the ball and the type of spin that we are putting on it. It's very receptive, unlike pickleball where you're hitting a lot of balls flat, and if you do spin it, not a whole lot happens. With tennis, when you're brushing the racket across the ball, we're going to get very different results. And you have to understand how this is controlling this. So there's four different ways to manipulate the tennis ball. We can spin it forwards, which is called topspin. We can spin it backwards, called backspin. We can cut across it, which is called side spin, or we could try to hit the ball flat and not have it rotate at all. It's very important we understand how that ball is going to come off our racket. If we think we're going to hit with topspin, but we actually hit it with backspin, we're going to miss shots. So it's very important to build up that understanding of how this racket is interacting with the ball. So imagine using your tennis racket to hit a wheel and to try to make that wheel spin. If I do this, which way is that wheel going to spin? It's going to spin forwards. If I move it this way, that wheel is going to spin backwards. And if I come straight at it, it's not going to spin at all. That's the same thing that's going to happen when we hit the tennis ball. If we do this, we're going to make it spin forwards. If we cut down the back of it, it's going to spin backwards. And if we come straight at it, it's not going to have any spin. The first thing we need to understand about how to hold the racket is we need to put our dominant hand at the bottom of the racket with enough space for our non-dominant hand to fit above. If you were to hold the racket the other way around, where you have the non-dominant hand at the bottom and the dominant hand on top, you're going to be choked up a little bit too much hitting forehands and one-handed backhands. And if you were to hit a two-handed backhand, your arms get a bit crossed and it's a little bit uncomfortable. So make sure your dominant hand is at the bottom of the racket. To be able to hit great shots, we got to get to the ball. We got to get into the right position. And in order to do that, we have to be ready. We have to be in what we call a ready position. Feet are a little bit wider than shoulder width apart. I have a little spring in my step. I'm ready to move. I'm holding the racket like we just discussed, and I'm pretty much ready for whatever comes my way. Understanding how to grip the racket is extremely important. That's going to give you stability. It's going to help you to control the racket and ultimately control the tennis ball. Now, I'm going to be talking about having your hand behind the racket, on top of the racket, and in front of the racket. It's extremely important that you understand what this means. Once you do understand it, you can be your own coach, you can find your own grips. And if you need any help and any advice, I can give you instruction from a mile away. I can give you simple cues to help you to adjust the grip and get the right grip for the right shot. So if I take my hand and I put it on top of the racket, this would be a great grip to chop something. If I put my hand at the side of the racket, I wouldn't be able to really chop with the racket. We actually call this the chopper grip in England. In America, they call it the continental grip, but it means your hand is right on top of the racket. When we're hitting a forehand, we want our hand behind the racket, and this is relative to where we are sending the ball. So if I want to hit the ball this way, I want my hand behind the racket. That's going to give me stability and strength as I strike the ball. I could be pushing through the ball with this grip. Whereas if I'm on top of the racket, it's doable, it's okay, but this has a little bit more strength because I'm behind it. I have more leverage. If I put my hand here, you can see it's kind of in front of the racket, so it's a really weak position to strike the ball from. So when we're hitting a forehand, we need to get the grip where the hand is right behind the racket and feel like we can have support and stability at the point of contact. One way of finding this grip is to bounce the ball into the ground here, and my hand is behind the racket. That's going to be the same grip I'm going to use to send the ball forwards. Now, the spin I've put on that ball is top spin. That ball is spinning forwards. This grip is great for brushing up the back of the ball, creating a little bit of top spin, which is extremely useful for getting that ball over the net and in the court because it arcs over the net. So we understand what it means to be behind the racket, on top, in front. We know what we're trying to do in terms of spinning the tennis ball. Let's talk about the shape of the swing, the technique. Now, when it comes to hitting a topspin forehand, we want to make sure we get the racket back and beneath the ball. A very simple motion to get there. We want to give ourselves the best chance to time the shot. Once we hit the tennis ball, hopefully we can create a little bit of topspin, and we're going to finish with the back of the racket next to the head. So the arm is just going to rotate, and it's going to be a very efficient, clean stroke. If we start to finish with the front of the racket here, puts a lot of strain on the wrist. So try to focus on your finishes whenever possible. Whenever you're in the right place and you're not scrambling for a shot, see if you can do that swing path. If we're hitting a flat forehand, all that means is we're coming straight into the ball a little bit more even. We're not trying to brush the ball to spin it forwards, but I'd still like to see a similar finish with the back of the racket next to the head. If I wanted to put some backspin on the ball, we also call that a slice. I would put my hand more on top of the racket because that's going to allow me to open up the strings and come down the ball. So instead of being behind to create topspin or to hit the ball relatively flat, I can open up the strings, put my hand on top of the racket, and put a little bit of backspin on that ball. I'm kind of chopping the ball. Not too much of a chop, but just coming under the ball and again making that ball spin backwards. The secret to the forehand slice is making sure that we have a consistent racket face. We don't want to be having the racket flip around. We don't want to be using the wrist too much. So try to just keep a very stable and consistent racket face from start to finish. Backspin is great for quite a few reasons. You can give your opponent a different ball. So your topspin will hit the floor and it will bounce on a little bit. The backspin will either skid, stay low, or might even stop close to the net. So it's giving them a very difficult task of tracking that ball. It also allows you to drop the ball close to the net. So if you see your opponent far back, this little backspin stroke will get the ball to bounce near the net and stop. There's three different backhands. We have a one-handed backhand, a two-handed backhand, and a slice backhand. All right, so let's talk about the topspin two-handed backhand. This might be your easiest option when you're hitting from this side of your body. We want to take the non-dominant hand and put it behind the racket, just like we're hitting a forehand. So it's the same grip as we hit the forehand, but we're just doing it with the non-dominant hand on this side of the body. The right hand, for me, my dominant hand is going to be on top of the racket like I'm chopping something. Left hand strong, right hand on top. That's going to be the easiest way to have stability and range of motion as we're hitting a topspin backhand. Again, we want to try to spin that ball forwards as we're hitting the shot. Racket right behind the tennis ball, again, slightly beneath the ball because we're going to swing up and try and create a little bit of topspin. Keep the take back as simple as possible. We want to guarantee a clean strike. And then once we finish this shot, let's finish with the back of the racket next to the head. Very similar to the forehand. Let's talk about the one-handed topspin. Same concept. We want the hand behind the racket. You can see if I'm hitting that ball forwards here, my hand is behind the racket. This would be on top of the racket and I wouldn't have the strength and stability. and this would be in front of the racket, which would make it extremely difficult to hit a powerful, controlled, stable shot. So hand behind the racket, we don't want to be under the racket, we don't want to be on top of the racket. Behind the racket, feel strong and stable, and that's going to allow us to have a nice, easy stroke where we have strength and control, and we can put a little topspin on that ball. When it comes to hitting the one-handed backhand, you may feel pretty weak if you start throwing the racket around using too much wrist. You don't have that extra hand for the stability. So we have to make sure that we feel strong from start to finish. Now, if I hit this shot here, hand behind the racket, and finish in this position, both arms have moved in opposite directions. My left arm has worked as a counterbalance. But this position I'm in here at the finish is the same position I was in here and the same position I was in here. So I'm keeping that stability with the wrist and making sure I'm not doing too much that's going to make me feel a little bit weak. When it comes to hitting a backspin backhand, also known as a slice backhand, we want the hand on top of the racket. That's going to allow us to open up the face and come down the back of the ball to create that spin. Now, some of you may feel more comfortable holding the racket with two hands. That's fine. Try and have your left hand on top of the racket. And again, same action, coming down the ball to create that backspin. One hand is a little bit more useful because it's the type of shot you might want to use when you're stretched, and having one hand on the racket gives you that extra reach. We have to make sure that the spin comes from coming down the ball and not under the ball, because if you come under the ball and the strings are like this, it's going to fly too far up into the sky. So I want to come down the ball, again, keeping a very strong wrist and a very consistent racket face. When I finish this shot, I want to feel like I'm in this position where the racket is pointing roughly towards where I want the ball to go. Again, this is going to be a great shot for giving your opponent a different ball to have to track. Some of your shots will have topspin, some will have slice. That becomes very difficult for them. Or you can use that backspin to just drop that ball over the net and make them run forwards. Let's talk about the grips and technique for a serve. We'll get into the rules a little bit later, but essentially what we're trying to do is serve from behind the baseline and put the ball in the opposite box by hitting the ball from above our head. The technique we're going to use at first is going to be very similar to serving a volleyball, which would look something like that. We're going to have our hand behind the racket, so at the point of contact, again, we feel pretty stable, and we're going to treat it like a volleyball serve where we just, instead of hitting it with our hand, hit it with the racket. Once you get comfortable striking the ball, pushing it into the box, we can start to develop a throwing motion. So just like if you were throwing a ball over the net, or if you were throwing the racket over the net, please don't do that. We can use that same motion, but instead of letting go of the racket, we can strike the tennis ball with the same motion. So this would be my throwing motion. This would be me imagining to throw the racket over the net, and this would be my serve. Very similar. So as you develop your serve into more of a throwing motion, I want you to focus on following through down the left side of your body if you're right-handed, with the side of the racket you've hit the ball with facing that left leg. So it looks something like this. That allows you to really rotate the arm and the racket freely, quickly around your body. It's a very effortless swing. Once you've got that, see if you can take your grip from being behind the racket to a little bit more on top of the racket, like you're chopping something. That's going to allow you to create more spin. So if you're looking for more spin, which is going to make the ball move a little bit, make it more challenging for your opponent to get back, it's going to give you a few more angles because the ball's going to be swerving out of court, then the chop grip is going to allow you to do that. So we're basically hitting a slice, like we hit a slice forward and a slice backhand with this grip, but now we're doing it from up in the sky. It's going to take you a little bit of time to get that, but essentially we're going to evolve slowly from being behind the racket to being a little bit more on top of the racket and try to keep that throwing motion and keep that finish. Let's talk about the grips and technique for a volley. Now, a volley means we're going to hit the ball before it bounces. So we'll be a little bit closer to the net. We're going to be in our ready position. Try to hold the racket like you're chopping something. And if the ball comes to my forehand volley, I'm going to step with my left foot and just try to block it. If it comes to my backhand volley, I'm going to use one hand and again, just block it. You can use two hands on your backhand volley if you like, but try to keep this shot as simple as possible. Someone's going to hit a ball at you and you need to use that power and just block it back. If you put any spin on your volleys, it should be backspin, not topspin. That's going to keep the technique a little bit more simple, easier to time the shots, and it's going to allow you to control that ball more effectively. The last shot we'll discuss is the overhead, or smash, as you might like to call it. Now, that is when the ball goes up into the sky. You can let it bounce, or you can hit it without it bouncing, but you're going to hit it very similar to the way we would hit a serve. It can be a little bit more challenging to time because it could be coming from really high. The wind could be blowing it. So think about your service motion, but keep it simple. Think about that volleyball serve where we're just striking the ball. And as we progress to a little bit more of a throwing motion, we can do that if we feel like we're going to time it, but keep it simple. Ideally, we want to move our feet, get into the right position so we can step forward on the front foot. For me, that's going to be my left foot, and try and do a little throw motion, rotating the arm and the racket around the body.